My Name is Trauma is an illustrated children's book that explores trauma in informative and imaginative ways. Join trauma specialists Jon Jon and Paula Rivero as they share their experience helping traumatized victims become survivors. Stay tuned. It's time for Key Talks. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Key Talks. We are so glad that you're here watching us today, listening to us today. There's so many other podcasts out there, but you chose ours today, so thank you.
Yes.
And my name is Deanna. I am your co-host with, if you're watching, Paula across the table from me in the blue. And our guest today is not just Paula, but also Jon Jon.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Yeah. And if you've never met us before or heard of us before, we are Key Creative. We are a pediatric rehab med practice here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We provide supports for youth of all ages and all abilities, which we mean all sorts of different diagnoses, developmental disorders, difficult life circumstances. And if you want to get in touch with us or see if we could be a good fit for your family, visit us at keycreative.com. That's where you can fill out our intake form and share more information about you, and we'll go from there. So today's episode is on My Name is Trauma. This is the book that's in front of me. It's got Trauma the tiger. We have this wonderful handmade tiger plushie in front of me as well. And this book was co-created by Jon Jon and Paula, who are also co-creators of Key Creative. Right? I think Key Creative came first, and then My Name is Trauma down the line. Yes. And it's not just this book. I believe it's also they do workshops and speaking events about My Name is Trauma. Not just for youth either. It's also for like adults, helpers in this area to also recognize trauma, sometimes in themselves, but also just like recognize it in children and helping them to process it as well. Right?
For sure.
Totally. So I'm going to start. We'll just start with the book that's in front of us. So how did this book get made? And I think Paula has a story from her social work practice where she used a tiger. Can you tell me a bit about that?
I can, and I am going to admittedly share that my tiger's feeling awake and just slightly feisty. My heart is racing, so I'm nervous. But I'm excited. I'm nervous, I think, because this is such an important topic to me and something that has been so important in the work that I do for myself and here at Key Creative. So it gets me a little bit on my toes. But I do love to share how this book came about because it was such an organic way that it did. And so I guess it went back to around 2011. I was starting to do a practicum with Edmonton Public Schools, and I had an amazing practicum supervisor who I'll shout out to, Donna Mondor, and she was doing a trauma-informed practice, and she was doing consultation with the schools providing trauma therapy support. I actually had no idea what that meant or what that was, and so I was like a sponge. What she was saying and how she was understanding children's behavior was much different than how we were even working at Key Creative at that time, meaning that a lot of times we were looking at behavior as just the tip of the iceberg, and we weren't necessarily looking at that entire chunk of ice submerged underwater, meaning all the different life experiences, events, relationships, things like that impact who we are. And so she was looking at people in a whole different way. And I really connected with that. That really made sense to me, that people are more than just how they behave. And there's stories behind it. So after that, I remember coming home to Jon and sharing about trauma, and he was like, yes, like that makes sense. And it resonated with both of us, and we're like, we need to learn more. Like, we need to make this part of our practice. This is so important for the children that we're working with and that we could potentially be helping in this way. And so we went out to Detroit, Michigan, and we completed the a certification with the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children. We became certified. And from there, we kind of took off. So then fast forward when I was doing my second practicum placement at the Royal Alexander Hospital in the Child and Family Psychiatric Unit, I was working with an adolescent there who had experienced many traumatic events and was really having a hard time functioning and being at her best. And because I was trauma informed, I realized that there was a lot going on for her internally and that her development was really being impacted because of these experiences that she had. And so because of that training, I had brought in a whole bunch of little figurines, and one of them was a little tiger. The tiger is often used to describe what trauma can look like. And so it was very fitting that it was there, and I picked it up and I'm like, I need to explain this in a way that she's going to connect with, because everything I'm saying right now just seems to be going over her head. And so I picked it up and I basically started reciting what is now in the book. I'm like, we all have these types of experience. It's like a little tiger inside of us, and it can make us feel afraid, powerless, and unsafe. And so the story goes. And I just saw a shift in her eyes, and almost like, at least the way it came to me, and thankfully it did come this way, whether it was experienced by her in this way or not, it looked like an enlightenment, like that I had touched on exactly or explained it in just the way that she needed to understand what was happening.
Right.
And so when
yeah.
I saw that shift in her eyes, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. She understands this now. And understanding is sort of the biggest step towards healing. Once we can understand ourselves and what's going on.
I'm sure that she's probably had she's probably in that mindset where it's like, great, it's another grown up trying to talk at me about how I'm supposed to be feeling.
Yeah.
But the tiger definitely connected where it's this is not about me trying to fill my practicum hours. This is about me trying to frame this for you, and to also, I think, having it as a tiger can help pull that away from yourself, give a level or a degree away from yourself. Because I find that internalizing point must be huge, regardless if it's trauma or anxiety or anything else in that umbrella. If I'm getting that correct,
you have that actually spot on. And what I was doing is I was externalizing it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Externalizing.
But the way you explained it is very clear. And that's exactly it.
So how about for our audience then, let's go to what is trauma and what does it mean to be trauma informed? Because for me on the outside, I'm thinking trauma informed, it's more than just, I've read it in a textbook in school. I think it's for example, maybe something adverse, like a car accident happens or somebody bullies you really hard as a teenager, and you catalog that interaction in your brain, and that creates a pattern of aversion or hostility or just hypersensitivity around that place. And maybe you were 17 and now you could be 27 and you're still really hyper aware and sensitive because of those cataloged experiences. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right. Who would like to start?
I'll take a stab at this one.
Okay.
Trauma is the impact in someone's body from an event that could have caused terror, feelings of unsafe, or of being unsafe, and that response in the body is linked to certain stimuli when the event occurred. And so I like Dr. Gabor Mate's way of explaining trauma in the sense that trauma isn't the event. That's called the traumatic event. Okay. And the event could be something, such as physical, sexual abuse, neglect, but it could also be something that is not necessarily related to those types of abuses. It could be an event that someone just feels powerless, unsafe, or terror, and that person develops an overdeveloped fear response to a stimuli. And trauma is, even when the stimulus or the event is no longer, the threat is no longer there, the body reacts just as if it was present.
Or the body, I would even like the body remembers. It's the body that
Yeah.
remembers because we experience this through our senses. And so I like that too. I really resonated with what Dr. Gabor Mate said too. It's not what's happened. It's not what happened to us. It's what's happening inside of us. And when you experience something that makes you feel afraid, powerless, and unsafe, you go into a state of terror. And when you have this, when this state of terror occurs and it doesn't go away, it changes the whole chemical balance in your brain, right? And it doesn't get shut off.
Okay.
So it's interesting that we're talking about this in 2024, like what is trauma?
Mhm.
And we had our book reviewed by a peer or someone in the literary world, and gave us a 3 out of 5, which I think at least it's not a 2 out of 5, right? But I was expecting like a 5 out of 5. And one of the critiques was they weren't clear as to what the tiger was, because the tiger in our book shows an externalization of the impact on the body. So the character is trauma the tiger. But the person reviewing the book was like, well, no, trauma is the event. And so much literature has come up now where most people think trauma is the event. That's called the traumatic event. But our book now, being reviewed and looked at across the world, shows it's more in line with Dr. Gabor Mate's, teachings of, and most people's teachings of what trauma is. It's the impact on the body. And it's not just the event.
Yeah.
What's happening
It's not the
inside.
Traumatic
Well-
event, trauma. Yes, Mike?
And like to think about like the semantics of it. It's like, well, the common thing that people are talking about, because and it's also unique of the time that it is because like in 2024 we have a world that is traumatized. Like we've just come out of a pandemic, and when you refer to it, you refer to you have trauma. So it's not something of that's trauma. Like that's like more like someone using it as a way to kind of be a pejorative on a bad event. But the reality is of there is that understanding in the general dialect. But the reality is a lot of people, they might go with to be a little sassy, be like that trauma or something like that, like, kind of in that sense. But that's not where like the language is there. But language does evolve, it changes. And so where some people may now have adopted kind of like a more sassy way, prescriptive way of assigning it on trying to externalize it, which, hey, as a way of processing your trauma, trying to externalize it and move away past it might be part of it. But the reality is it is inherently something that we hold and carry with us.
Yeah, and I think on that, Mike, I think it's really important to note that there is a chemical shift and change in the developing brain where that fear response, that amygdala, for example, becomes overdeveloped. So, and you can't just shut that off. It doesn't get just shut off. So a normal brain, I like to tell my clients, is like a smoke detector or a radar, let's say. And it normally is flashing at like a normal heartbeat level, right? And it's detecting if there's any threat, and that's normal. And then when a threat happens or you start to see something that makes you feel afraid, it gets a little bit faster. And then when you actually experience it and you're feeling afraid, powerless, and unsafe, it goes off. And it's telling your body you need to get ready to fight, flight, or fright, right? So it goes into the fear response. And then it becomes trauma. You become traumatized, let's put it that way. It doesn't shut off. So the event stops, but a few weeks later, a month later, your fear response hasn't shut off. You're still entering a space.
So you could have like somebody lights a little birthday candle and your smoke detector's like, oh, this is huge.
Yeah, this reminds me of the fire that happened and losing my cat, right? And so they're triggered by something that reminds them of that traumatic experience.
And during our training in Michigan, when Paul and I were with Dr. William Steele with the Star Network, and we would watch these case studies. These case studies would show Dr. Steele working with these highly traumatized, very severely impacted by trauma individuals. And one boy in particular, I believe this was on American television or 60 Minutes, and it was showing his live psychotherapy, play therapy, draw using art to help externalize the trauma. And one boy witnessed his one of his parents, shoot his other parents and kill the other parent. And throughout the therapy sessions, throughout the weeks, eventually they got to a place where the boy was able to draw the worst thing that happened. And that's one thing that under this style of therapy, this drawing therapy, you ask, eventually you build this relationship, this safe place, and then you get into the work and you ask the question, and what was the worst part? And he drew, I was thinking, well, he would draw perhaps some of the most gruesome things, the gun and all of that. You can, where the imagination goes. But this boy drew him being alone and none of his friends coming to say, "Are you okay?" after it. So to this boy, the traumatic events, of course, could be of course grief and loss and seeing murder in front of you. And for this boy, it was also not feeling alone after the fact and no one checking to see what has happened. And so to me, as a therapist, one of the biggest lessons, and I have to keep reminding myself, is to never assume what the worst part is for a person. And we were taught also that 100 people could experience the same event, but they might have 100 different reasons why that event was traumatic.
Yeah.
And impacted them the way it did.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably why I'm feeling like when there might be trepidation around traumatic events and trauma, because people, I think, still have benchmarks or gatekeep what it means. Like, that's not a traumatic event. Like, oh, you failed a spelling bee or this happened. And it's like, your feelings are your feelings and your body's reacting the way your body's going to react. And it doesn't have to be like a tornado has to be, oh, you win the trauma Olympics. You did it. Like, wow, good job for your nervous system. It's like, your feelings are valid on this podcast.
It's almost like, in some culture in our society, it's like, well, who had it worse? It's kind of like we need to outdo each other with whose trauma was worse, in a sense, right? Like, especially on social media, it's and putting things in perspective. And I will say, just as a caveat, there's some really screwed up things going on in the world, and people, I can't judge one person's trauma to the next. And there's some pretty screwed up things going on, some injustices going on. So I think that's the hard thing to kind of weigh out, that all we can control is working with the person as therapists, the person's truth and their own experience. And I have to check myself as a therapist to make sure my judgment, my biases are not creeping into judging their experience.
Yeah.
Well, and there's so many number of factors. Like, another thing that we're talking about this season in some degree is something like with neurodivergence and ADHD, like I have myself. I've had to learn that, like, I take a lot of effort in like listening with regards to a conversation, but I engage in a lot of parallel story to be like a way of affirming. But to other people, it's like that can come off as me trying to like compete in the same thing. And it's like, no, this is my attempt to relate. And so like a lot of people who don't necessarily have those skills can also kind of come into it. There's the messed up things. There's the things where it's like just understanding we all have like different brains. And again, it's not like a measure of like, hey, I can handle this trauma, but like, like going to the doctor and getting blood drawn and a needle might like, paralyze someone in that same sense. So there's a lot of difference that can come up, and it's hard to consider all those factors.
Yeah.
Sure.
The one thing in the book that I'm thinking of that, goes along what Jon was saying too, and you, Deanna, is that we all experience things differently. So it says, I wake up when you experience something that makes you feel afraid, powerless, and unsafe. This is different for everyone, right? So it really validates that there's so many different type of experiences that could leave you with the feeling of being afraid, powerless, and unsafe, and put you in that state of terror. Yeah. And then it makes me think of just that comment that this is written as a children's book, but the message is universal, right? Like it speaks to all ages, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's been one of the most powerful outcomes of this book that I feel proud about, is that it is a universal message that is connecting us in our understanding, whether we're young or old.
Yeah. What I like about Trauma the Tiger is there's so many cartoon characters out there that you could have been like, I'm Timothy the Tiger, I'm Tabitha the Tiger, but you
Funny
literally
you say
call them Trauma the Tiger. Yeah.
So I have to tell you, that is funny you say that, because we were, I'm not going to necessarily say who, but we were approached or had an opportunity to connect with a large book publishing company. And one of the feedbacks that they gave us was that you should really make it that your tiger has a name. Like,
well, we disagree because
it would be much more appealing if
or
it
much
was
more
commercialized if you had a name. And I have to say, when I left, I'm like, no.
The commercial is not clinical, and like not
like,
everybody has the
no.
same Timothy. We all have it's trauma.
It just it never quite connect. I mean, and I thought, I'm like, maybe it could be TT the Tiger, or I don't know, but nothing ever has been fitting except Trauma the Tiger.
I think if you gave them a name like that, they would be compared to like Tony the
Tiger.
Yeah.
What are you gonna say, Mike?
Like, well, it's the nature of allegory, right? Like you have the allegory of the tiger, but the name is the straight up descriptor that you're trying to relate to everyone.
Yeah.
Where like this is a book that I've seen you work with really young kids. I've seen you teaching teachers about it and other professional staff, to, you know, Jon's work with Massey and like using this as a way of relating such a common thing. And the thing is like, if you tried to present it as Timothy, the person would be like, who the hell's Timothy? Like where's that relate to me? Yeah. Oh, like for all the Timothys out there, you know, great, you're recognized and whatnot, but like everyone else would be disconnected.
Yeah,
and that's the problem with over commercializing it, right? Like is
and
that
initially when we got that feedback, we're meeting with this organization, and they're not just connected to books, they're connected to all the major TV broadcasters, right? So they're behind a lot of the most popular shows now, right? Mm-hmm. And initially I'm thinking, okay, well, let's take the feedback, because I was in documentary mode, filmmaker mode. Let's figure out, because we were also trying to pitch a series. Paula and I came up with a 6-episode series. And so I'm thinking, okay, let's take their feedback, because this is the way to get our message out there, you know? And it's always a catch-22 of when you're collaborating with other producers, executive producers, you give up a little bit of control, or sometimes you give up a lot of control. I'm glad at this point to say now that we've kept the integrity of what were our vision and our mission. And our vision, and based on the feedback, well, that's a little bit, calling them trauma is a little too scary. It's a little too on the nose. And I at first, oh yeah, okay, on the nose. You know, this is the lingo around.
Or it makes people feel uncomfortable. Yeah.
Our book is also meant to talk about a serious subject in a playful way, and I think our book does that. It doesn't. If you pick up the book, My Name is Trauma, you are consciously going into it knowing it's talking about trauma. Yeah. Versus if you say, "Oh, my name's Timmy and the Tiger" or what have you, it's like, you know, I wonder if this has elements of trauma, and then you could literally feel triggered by it. But when you pick up the book and it says, My Name is Trauma, and we use it, we knowingly go into it thinking, well, this is going to be a heavy topic. But then the feedback has been from our clients that it was an awesome resource to explore a difficult topic that was scary. So so the reason I'm going on this rant is I still have plans with Paula and you guys to come up with a series, an animated series, because I do believe this belongs in people's, homes if they want to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think just along that, like, this is so important to us because just with the whole topic of mental health being a larger umbrella, is that these conversations need to happen. Hiding them doesn't make it easier or better or
Nope.
or more healing, right? It creates more shame and guilt and
Exactly, because
feelings.
you're what the critics said, that trauma is uncomfortable. Like, it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
It
And
is.
it's okay to have these unashamed conversations.
Yeah, like let's lean into why you think that this
Yes.
is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like,
And even at the schools, I'll advocate that there'll be, you'll hear conversation about, well, should we be talking about this with our kids? And I say, yes, it's just like any of those hard topics. Knowledge is power. And when we have that knowledge and information, it actually better helps us be informed and make the decisions and choices we need to make in order to be more healthy, brave, courageous individuals to share our stories, because through our stories is where we heal, right?
Yeah, well, like you basically have trauma, and you have a cartoon tiger that is essentially a way of kind of making it a little bit more benign as part of that therapeutic process of the fact that, okay, like if I can accept this understanding, this allegory, and this imagery, I can then use that as part of a tool, and then it makes it a little bit less scary. It makes it gives you that ability in that process. And like, again, like the book has imagery that for the person who has that trauma with themselves, like say someone who has been the victim of the fires, like we've worked with and whatnot. There is imagery of fire and whatnot. But the thing is it's done so in a way, it's a children's book. Like it's not a book full of gore and violence and other things.
There's
but,
enough separation
and
to be able to look at it, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, there are definitely things that, we have a responsibility as therapists in dealing with this stuff, where you might have something come up, but you can't prepare for everything. I remember one of the workshops where Jon brings up a bear attack, and then someone's like,
I've been attacked by a bear.
exactly. So like,
So let's talk.
let's
Yeah.
talk. Yeah.
Let's
know-
explore that. Yeah.
And the thing is your fight or flight is going to ramp up from that.
Yeah.
And so like people, there's a measure of understanding, but like in what the book does to really kind of bring it together in a way that is easy enough to process. Because you know what, if someone is reading a book and they're at the point where like this triggers me, well, they're really on that high level of scale of that. And it's not that those clients don't exist, and it's not that their feelings aren't valid. Like that's someone who's going to have like a multi-level process to even get them to a point where they can start processing the trauma. But you have to have a point of doing it. And the children's book, I think, has been really excellent in
Thanks, Mike.
being the starting step for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I want to jump into like how you've used this book. So you've already mentioned like I think to like when like I see, for example, when I see the Edmonton Public Library, you can take out this book right now, and I love seeing like it's on hold, it's out, it's like it's being used by families all over
Yeah.
town right now.
Neat.
And I have this image of like this could be in a library, and a kid who's not ready to talk about it with the grown-ups in their lives could just take this out and start to digest it on their own. Or like I imagine you may use it as a clinical tool, or we're just gonna have like there's no strings attached, no outcome here. We're just gonna read this together and see what comes up. So in what ways in your practice, in workshops, or as Mike said with Massey, like some more examples of how you have applied My Name is Trauma.
I can give 2 clinical examples, and then I mean I can give a million lots of examples, but I'll share 2 that come to my mind right now. And one is with a client who was 17 and has been living at their biological parents' or mom's place, single mom. And would sleep during the day and stay up all night, experience severe trauma, physical, sexual abuse, would not go to school and I was brought in to the multidisciplinary team to hopefully engage in, because he likes working out. So in some working out and some martial arts, and I would get maybe a minute or two, and the team would be like, "That's fantastic. Like, that's good. Keep going." I'm like, "Really? I've been here for 3 hours. Like, you've got more in 1 minute than what people have tried to get the last 5 years. So keep going."
Wow.
So then I thought, okay, well, he's developed this safety with me. I've been talking a lot about experiences, not calling it trauma. And I asked his permission and his mom's permission and the team's permission if I could include the book, My Name is Trauma, just to introduce it. And they all said yes. And finally, the client said, "Yes, I'm ready for that." So I'd come to his place at like 4 p.m. He had just woken up because he was up all night and was playing video games and etc. So he came and he says, "Jon, I don't feel like working out today. Let's just read this book." So I said, "Okay." And he looked at it and he says, "My name is Trauma." Like, and just holding the book, he's shaking, like his whole body was tremoring. I'm like, okay, just take some deep breaths. Remember our grounding techniques? It's like breathing in for 4, out for 7, out. And it helped him calm. He's like, I said, "Hey, we don't need to read this book." He's like, "No, I want to read this book." And he gets to the point, to the page where it says, "I can be sensed in your body."
Yeah.
And then he goes, Jon, my dad used to strangle me." And he goes, and I'm like, oh my goodness, he's getting to this point. I'm like, okay, chi breath. And it got to the point after, like, I was counting, like, oh my God, like, is he going to pass out? After about 25 seconds, he started to calm down, going, "Let's go to the next page." And he kept going to the next page until the end of the book. And he goes, "I have to tell you something. My dad used to strangle me." And that's it. And he wouldn't say anything. And I said, "Gosh, that must have been, tell me more about that. That must have been so terrible." He's like, "The worst part of that would be that no one knew I was being strangled." And at that point, his whole body shifted, his posture shifted, and he was fully awake and wanted to work out. So this, I guess, this session, using the book, after so many weeks of building trust and safety and rapport, was kind of like a tipping point for him. Gave him empowerment to be able to safely share. And I said, "Do you? Is it okay if I share what you shared with me with your mom?" He says, "Yes, she already knows. I've just never really talked about it." And I said, "Okay, that's amazing. And what can we do next time we feel this way?" He says, "Well, you set me up with the punching bag downstairs. I'm going to go downstairs like we did today." And I soon realized, like, all of those sessions that I thought were a waste, like the waste of time, where he very, very later on validated to say, "You never gave up on me. You kept coming to me. You didn't judge me for not going to school. And this book validated that I'm not alone. And I have a tiger inside. I always knew I had something inside."
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I said, it doesn't have to be a tiger. It could be, on one of the pages, it could be a flamingo, or it could be kind of an animal, or it could be a different version of you or whatever. And for him, it was an ability for him to voice what had happened. I've also experienced, so that's the one example. Second example is working with Massey on APTN's Queen of the Oil Patch. And for Massey, it was an opportunity because he also is very artistic. And so he saw this book speaking to, as he shares, his inner child. And that inner child is an artist. And so using the tiger, he was actually able to draw a safe place using a butterfly. And that butterfly that metamorphs. Metamorphs or morphs.
Oh, metamorphs, yeah.
Metamorphs into Isis Rain. So Isis Rain, being two-spirited identity, also was an empowering, I guess, pivoting moment, dealing with addictions and all the different trauma, sexual abuse, etc. So so that I have two examples of one, teenage, and then also one with an adult. So
Incredible. Wow.
I think one of the ways that I've seen this book's value has been in schools and helping other children who may not have the same type of impact or experiences that someone who has been traumatized has. I've used it to create empathy and compassion and just help people understand that this is something that happens. And when this happens, when someone experiences something that makes them feel afraid, powerless, and unsafe, it makes it hard for them to be at their best. And so now I'm trying to help these children understand that you may see someone being more aggressive, or you may see someone withdrawing, or you may see someone who's disconnected, or whatever the behavior might be that makes them, look like maybe a bad kid. And I try to help them understand that this is likely a hurting individual and someone who needs empathy and someone who may need, someone who needs empathy and someone who needs compassion, right? So that has been more recently how I've been using this book and bringing it into the classroom, because a lot of times people are hoping that we're going to just fix the person who's impacted, and there's definitely healing and therapy that goes into that. But there definitely needs to be empathy and compassion with the environment and people who are around them.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't change. If that child does not have compassion and empathy surrounding them and unconditional love, which becomes extremely difficult when you start to see the behaviors that, happen or develop, through this. It's very challenging. That's why it needs to be a whole school, a whole system change. And that's where, it can become more challenging for sure. But I've started in the classroom and then used it with the schools as a whole, because I've shared this message, like, we all need to be part of this village. And yes, it might seem self-serving for just one individual, but in my opinion, thankfully, we have one individual who has opened up a space for us to have a greater knowledge and understanding of a topic that is going to impact us all in one way or another at some point in our life. And if we can have more empathy and compassion, then I think we will see a better world, all in
100%.
all. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more example I'd like to share is in the Philippines, where after 2011, Paul and I wrote the book. Actually, I remember driving to a client up to Marmot Basin. We were at the bottom of Marmot Basin, off the turnoff of the highway to get up towards.
To our listeners, that's a ski hill.
Yeah, sorry, in Jasper, Alberta.
We're a rural practice.
Yeah, Paula and I, Paula had recently shared about the success of externalizing, using a character, the tiger, to help her client externalize and to learn about trauma, the impacts on the body. So I remember Paula and I writing the book on the way to Marmot Basin. By the time we got to the Marmot Basin overflow parking lot, it was written. And obviously there's been a little bit of some grammatical shifts. And so, sometimes people think of the simplicity of the book and kind of can overshadow its value,
Oh, okay.
but really it is some of the most simplest things can be some of the most effective things.
Mm-hmm.
And so translating that into Tagalog is much harder than it was to write it. So because in Tagalog or Filipino or in Waray, which is the dialect in Tacloban City where we work with street light organization, there's different ways to say the same thing. And so my experience, I guess, just as a Filipino Canadian, I found that very humbling to know that, my name is trauma. Translation, you need so many intricacies and not just, let's just put it in Google Translate. But there wasn't Google Translate yet at the time, I don't think. we collaborated with Changing Together, and our Tita Ella, one of Paula's first Tagalog teachers, helped us create the first Filipino version. And we used that in 2013 with not only Streetlight Philippines, but a variety of different organizations that work frontline with children with trauma. We did a whole press conference in Tacloban, in
promoting
that year.
trauma-informed care training and understanding what is trauma as communities. Yeah.
And then the series of events, and I may have talked about this already in the Balikbayan podcast episode, but if you want to check that out to get more context, we did the My Name's Trauma workshop, or at that time we called it the I Am Trauma workshop. And weeks later, Typhoon Yolanda hits Tacloban and the Visayas regions. Months later, when we were asked to come back and do a My Name is Trauma workshop frontline with the children of Streetlight and the staff, we learned of the power of that first workshop.
And the importance.
And the fact that it was translated in Filipino, even though Tagalog, it's a controversial thing right now to say, oh, Tagalog, and using the word Filipino. But anyways, Filipino had such a big impact on the staff, because the staff were the ones doing their best to keep it together for the children. And also the children who also understood Tagalog. Most people in the Philippines across the country can understand Tagalog, but it being translated, instead of it just being in English, it created more trauma-informed care of, okay, we all experience trauma differently. And this is my humbling lesson, again, reminder that 100 people or 1,000 people or 60,000 people or 1 million people can experience the same experience, or slightly different experience, but they might be all impacted differently.
Yeah.
And so when we came back in 2014, we had it translated again in Waray. And that's thanks to Cecil Bombed Israel and his family, who translated it into Waray. And that had an even more, I think, positive impact, because it shows that most of the literature and media is presented, like everything on TV is English or Tagalog or Filipino. So when it's translated into the actual dialect, and we have an actual translator during that workshop, make it more meaningful. I think it also validates who they were as people, who they are as people. Incredible people. We're all worthy of love and healing and attention. So that was a great way that we could use
representation matters, not just visually but linguistically. Completely.
And those contextual things, like of putting in the time so that you can really do that. And like it's something that it just has so much value. It's like the true value of an allegory, which is why I went and grabbed my phone here, is it's a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral one, sometimes political. It's a symbol that allows everyone to really kind of like relate on that level. And like that's, had you not spent the time of doing that, think of the difference that it didn't get to make if it hadn't done that. And like you were able to, go and pivot and help people who you had already just been working with go through something on such a level that, you're not able to relate to it directly, other than like, well, we get traumatized when we watch the video of seeing everyone in the orphanage on the roof there and stuff like that, because that's something that you think about for yourself. But like imagining their experience, but giving them some way through language that they can actually really bring it to be like something that they can start to process and start to kind of go there. But even beyond that, like they were already a very resilient group, because like I remember that the other part of it is that, they were there taking people in, like, as soon as the waters had kind of subsided, they are already kind of, really working to do that. They didn't have time to be traumatized, but it still didn't mean that it
Impact them. Yeah.
and had to be processed.
Yeah. It was actually on that 2014 when we went back to do the My Name is Trauma workshops with the kids and staff that I had the realization that this book mattered and was important, because one of our partners who came with us read it for the first time and he closed it and he had tears in his eyes and he was like, wow, this is the first time that I understand what's going on for me. And I will never forget that picture in my head of seeing him and his reaction to it. And I was like, oh, it's so important that we have these types of conversations and that people have something that can help them understand in a really simple way what could be happening for them.
Yeah. So, oh my goodness, in hearing about everything so far about like trauma and traumatic events, and also like the work that you've done with kids, that just triggered a memory in me about like when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and how this was elementary school, and around that grade 5, grade 6, they let us kids be in the teacher's office at lunchtime to like take the calls or look after the printer. That this little baby volunteer responsibility. And in my school at that time, there was a kid, I will call him Nicholas. And Nicholas had this bad reputation. He was known for being a big bully, for not handing in his homework on time. Everybody, like even if you were in grade 1, you knew who Nicholas was and how bad of a kid he was. So again, I would say grade 6, and I'm at the teacher's office doing my little volunteer thing. And in this school, if you had a physical altercation with a kid, you had to sign a pink sheet. Just to like your parents would have to sign it to confirm that they are aware that my child did this physical thing. And Nicholas was unable to get this signature from his parents. And that was for me the first time where I was like, oh, something's wrong. And I didn't know what that really meant past that, but I saw this classmate in a completely different light afterwards. But that's about it. I wasn't able to know like what happened at home. We didn't share a lot of other things, but you kind of go and see where I'm going with.
I see where you're going with that. And I think it's like, I go back to teaching empathy, because empathy is a skill that we learn. And so we need to have these conversations with our children. And it doesn't have to be about the experience, but it needs to be about the feelings. We can relate on feelings. So obviously there's a lot of hurt and pain, and we can relate to that. Like
so it was not just like, you have a sad face, you have a happy face, or the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. Like that's still a cool rule. But it didn't respond to the feelings I was feeling when I noticed that something was wrong with my friend in a way that I couldn't intervene because it was outside of school time. Right?
Yeah. And doesn't that make us feel less like victims, like a victim with this person, and more like someone with compassion and understanding that can actually be a helper in the situation? I often find that in the school setting, I find that people are so focused on wanting to change that student, like I've shared, and and how I've advocated that it needs to be all of us looking and maybe gaining more empathy and understanding. I am much more passionate and driven to look at creating empathetic individuals and creating a community and a village than I am about trying to work one-on-one with a student. And it's not to say that I want to take away from working one-on-one with a student. I just know healing requires connection and relationship, and that tends to be one of the greatest, most important pieces of healing. So oftentimes in the school, families and parents become afraid of this person and they want them taken out, which I can have empathy for when I think of my little Lena or Braulio and they're in there and then maybe someone's being aggressive towards them. My maybe instinct is to say, we need to get that person out of here. Like, they're hurting people. However, I have made a shift in this thinking and have done more of, Lena, I want you to understand we're going to come across people who may be aggressive and may hurt us. And no, I don't want you to be hurt. And how can we understand that maybe they're hurting and there's a reason why they're acting the way they do? And if we can have that empathy, it might help Lena feel less afraid and hurt by him, but more loving and supportive of this person, so that we don't need to enter the classroom feeling afraid of people, but more compassionate.
Yeah.
I've tried to talk to schools because they're often like, this kid needs to get out of here. And they're like, we can't change all these parents. I'm like, well, maybe we need to change how these parents are thinking about things. Like, I get that they don't want their child to be hurt, but this is also life. Like, do we just take out these people who are causing problems, or do we have more empathy and like more resilience in our children if they have the capacity and if we have the privilege and ability? I mean, that's what I would like to see.
It's the difference with dealing with something versus avoiding something.
Yeah.
The reality is, and like, you know, you're not going to get resilient by avoiding something.
Mm-hmm.
You don't learn a measure of capacity of dealing with trauma. You don't learn, you know, how to better socialize and have that. It's like, why is inclusion so important in our classrooms?
Mm-hmm.
Because it makes better students.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Better people, better
teachers. And if people,
teachers,
and if people are treated as a bother, you know what, that honestly has more to do with like, they might have some extreme behaviors. They might have all these other things, but that is how people treat others has more to say about them than it does about that individual.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes.
Let's focus on that.
Yeah.
Right?
You know,
and we might see a shift in how this person becomes more connected,
more
accepted, more loved.
It humanizes them. It shows that they're a human being.
Yeah. The thing is they already have so much on their plate of having to deal with the challenges that they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So like, why add an additional barrier?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, yes, okay, if kiddos having a meltdown and stuff like that, that's just part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand there being safe and unsafe behaviors and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, like to truly help that person and like give them like an opportunity to grow,
to fail,
to fail. Yeah. Right. And like, and again, give them that idea of the safe space. Cause like, that's the thing is like, you know, we think about the safe space exercise. Well, what does that do? It gives you the opportunity to feel safe amongst an opportunity of like where you don't feel safe, whether that is something that is based in rational thought, irrational thought. It's literally based on a trauma response, which is part of our wiring of a rational way of dealing with something. And it's, you know, we're not expecting people to be, you know, like Navy SEALs where they have to like basically get to a point where trauma doesn't even like phase into them. They're so desensitized. It's like, no, we're trying to have things where people can connect, where they can have a human experience, where they can fail, they can succeed, and having a tool that allows them to just process things is so important.
I could do a whole episode on giving people the space to fail so much.
Yes.
Like, you know, I don't really have a lot of direct like intervention, we'll say, with families anymore, but I remember where like I'm not interested in going straight to the problem behaviors first. I want to know like your family rules, your family culture. How do you love one another? How do you accommodate and include one another before you bring me, the specialist, in who's supposed to address these target behaviors? Like, it doesn't work like that. And we've all been there for like probably well over a decade now to see like how it takes a whole bigger picture.
Yes.
Yeah, a whole family, a whole classroom, a whole school.
Like parents who may blow up at a bad grade at their child will turn into maybe like a teenager who isn't doing well at school, but they're too afraid to say it. So they'll still pretend to go to school, but just like walk out and
Yeah.
do their own thing. And
Yeah.
I've seen that with teenagers and with people in their 20s where maybe they dropped out of university, but they're too embarrassed to say anything. So they still go through the motions of putting their jacket on and walking out with a backpack, but who knows where they are? But because they're not, because that again, it's their pattern, their catalog of what they've experienced, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't want to let their parents down or their village down because of the expectations put on
Yeah,
them.
the expectations.
Yeah. No, that's a big one. And oh boy, there's lots to unpack with regards to those types of situations. And I think you hit it. You're all talking about something. I think what failure creates, and Mike, you alluded to it, resilience. It reminds people that they're resilient, and it allows people to dig deeper and to understand they're more than the thing that is challenging them.
Okay, that's a great bridge to what I think we want to go to next,
Yeah.
because you've mentioned, again, trauma and traumatic events and these amazing ways that it has impacted your clients. And now we got to talk about healing.
Yes.
And resilience is a big part of it, because healing is not going to be like, even a physical wound that is healed, there's still the scar tissue. There's still a little mark, right? It's not black and white. It's not 0 to 100. It
Yeah.
could be
It's
really
not
great,
linear.
and then it could be down and up
Yeah.
and down. It could be from when you were 7 and now you're 77. So let's talk about healing.
Yeah,
What does
like-
it look like? How does it feel? How everything?
Yeah, like I think healing is a spectrum and it's lifelong. So like I don't think there could be one particular intervention that works for everybody, or one concept that works for everybody. I think there's a multitude. This is why I think trauma-informed care is so important. Is we're still continuously figuring out what is going to work for certain individuals. I can particularly speak for the book and resources is just to understand what has happened to people's bodies. And maybe they'll never fully understand, but just to know something happened that was out of my control, that's impacted my life and my ability to live my best life, and that certain things in the environment are going to can potentially trigger me, and just to know that is okay, that's happened, and it's not their fault that that's happened. Oftentimes people take ownership over things that have happened, and they feel guilty about it. And I'm not saying if they did some behavior that it's not to excuse, not so good behavior. It's more so to help someone understand that this happened to me, and I don't have to feel guilty every day about something that I had no control over. And hopefully change an idea that they're not alone, that other people most likely have gone through a similar situation. And that's kind of what we try and share in the book, that you're not alone. There's billions of people in the world who may have gone through maybe something similar or different, but they are also having challenges coping.
And I think it's also normalizing and validating that there has been a change in your brain and how your brain is functioning. So that normalizing and validating that it's not your fault is because there's actually been changes, right?
Yeah.
That have occurred. And so it's actually quite normal that you're being more aggressive or withdrawn or agitated or unable to focus or attend or follow directions. Like, your brain has been changed, has been rewired in a way to be in a fear response, right?
Second part, I think another idea around healing can be to recognize that our bodies are meant to express physical movement, and that physical movement could be going to the gym, or it could be running ultra marathon, which I don't think everyone should do. But if that's part of, their physiological response to stress, then if it's actually helping you relieve stress, go ahead and do it. I often recommend a brisk walk, outdoors, where you can increase your heart rate just a little bit, to maybe even talking heart rate, where you can talk comfortably, but do it for 15 to 20 minutes. Or even if you can't do it for 10 minutes, do it for 5 minutes. If you can't do it for 5 minutes, do it for 1 minute. If you can't do it for 1 minute, Do it for 10 seconds, or walk on the spot. And you don't have to call it, oh, this is my trauma, the tiger suppressing.
Informed walk.
Yeah, this is
just
me
going on a walk.
taking care of myself. This
Yeah.
is self-care, right? With an intention. Deep breathing is one of the most basic but most effective, I think, ways in a reactive trigger moment to help calm the heart rate, because breathing rate can impact heart rate, and heart rate can impact our stress levels. So breathing in for 4 counts, breathing in, measured breathing, hold it for 4, out for 4, and then nothing for 4. Repeat that, 3 to 5 times and see how you're feeling. See where your mindfulness is also associated with some good,
Therapeutic
benefits. You can do any type of stretching. If you want to call it yoga, call it yoga. If you don't want to call it yoga, it doesn't fit with your spirituality, call it stretching. We're just being mindful of where you are in space. Parasympathetic response is the opposite of the sympathetic response, which is sympathetic is fight, flight, fright response. It's like, I got to get out of here. Parasympathetic, just think, well, that's the opposite. So what can I do to help calm? I was just watching an Instagram video this morning from the Human Garage Instagram, when they talk about myofascial release. And he was doing a talk for fighters, MMA fighters, Muay Thai fighters. And when you're literally in a fight, like you consciously choose this profession to go into a fight. So there's a fight. You're still activating the sympathetic response. Someone's going to, and sure, maybe your sympathetic response is going to be a lot less than someone who's not a fighter and is getting punched at or getting attacked, because you're training that every day. However, there's going to be adrenaline. There's going to be cortisol in the body, although it might be a little bit less compared to your average person who doesn't fight for a living. There's going to be that stress in your body. And that's what happens when we're traumatized, right? When we experience something traumatic. So they said that it takes 6 hours for someone who's like a fighter, who consciously goes into a fight, for that adrenaline or norepinephrine, same thing, cortisol, to leave the body. But one way to speed up that process is through fascia release, myofascia stretching, which we do that when we're working out or when we're doing pre or post stretching. So those are some really, I think, you don't have to pay $220 an hour for psychotherapy, even though, and I'm not saying it replaces that. It's just, if you don't have access to psychotherapy in your village, in your house, in your community, you can also do what humans have been doing since humans have existed, is help heal that trauma response. Another aspect to think about is we have this response for a reason. So it's to stay alive. So that's the hard part. Is to marry those two thoughts, to think if we didn't have this response, we would die as a species. We wouldn't have existed this long, because we wouldn't be afraid of anything. So I just want to share that it's okay to have the response. That the part why we exist as trauma therapists, trauma-informed care clinicians, is when the threat is no longer there, which for a lot of us, it's usually not there anymore.
Yeah, I think and so what we do with that, and what I have done with my client recently, is, evaluating, are you actually being threatened? Are you actually unsafe? Or are you just not okay? Right? And so now we're in a process of like having the emotion, instead of reacting right away, like we would in fight, flight, or fright is our reaction. We want to pause and respond. But when we pause, we're evaluating, am I actually not safe? Am I in a state of threat where I need to protect myself and fight, flight, or fright? Or am I just not okay and I need to take a moment to maybe breathe or walk away or smell something that's going to make me feel good or draw out my feelings? So it's taking a moment to understand what is actually happening around you, and do you need to react or respond, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where that pause becomes so important. But it takes a lot of work in that healing process to be able to come to a place to create awareness around that. So patience is so important with ourselves too.
So there's lots of like physiological strategies, physical strategies that every trauma-informed care specialist or therapist can bring. But there's one particular breathing technique that has been studied, and Dr. Andrew Huberman from the States has recommended as a direct correlation to helping calm that fight, flight, or fright is this quick inhale twice with a longer exhale. So it sounds kind of like a or and he talks about that type of breathing when we were young and we just finished crying, or we're just crying because of something unconsolable, and then we find ourselves breathing like something like that, right? He's shared that actually is a great breathing technique consciously that we can do to help in the moment. Adding to what Paula shared is some of the top-down techniques of like using cognitive behavior therapy with trauma-informed care is also a great way. But again, that is sometimes difficult to do without a trained individual. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing it on yourself, maybe ask yourself the questions that Paula is saying and figure out, well, is the threat there? But to get there, your body has to be available and your brain needs to be available. So, I mean, there's so many different strategies to get the body there. Paula does a lot of great, when we're in the Philippines, helps create with our clients and our organizations, these little self-care kits or these self-care toolboxes that people can put different things that stimulate or help calm the senses. So aromatherapy as well. And you want to talk more about that, Paula?
Well, just it's a sensory toolkit, or I call it the awesome toolkit, with different resources that they can use to help support them with, emotions or when they're dysregulated. So
yeah, this is
Sort
relaxing.
of
this is calming and
this
alerting.
is calming. Like what is going to help you feel good in that moment? Is it something with your sense of taste, smell, tactile, auditory? Like what is it? Let's put it in that toolkit and we can use it. And then it's a practice. So like anything, if you want to get good at something, you need to put time and effort into it. It doesn't just happen. It requires practice, attention, intention, and consistently, right? Over time. And one of the most important things with healing our nervous system from the impact of trauma is that pattern repetitive movements. So like Jon was talking about, the walking, or any type of movement or tapping. That's why EMDR.
Tapping, clapping, drumming.
Anything that you're using your right and left brain, anything, and which are so many different activities, are very therapeutic in helping calm our nervous system and reminding ourselves that I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm in a good place, all is well, right? And then that brings me to just like some basic stuff like positive affirmations.
Yeah, I was like, just write that on a Post-it note, put that on my computer.
And now you're retraining your brain to remind yourself that you're not a bad person. You are a good person. You are amazing, surprising, beautiful, and powerful, and you deserve to be loved. You matter. You're enough. And reminding yourself of all of these things, and then incorporating gratitude, because we know the positive impacts that gratitude can have. And when we can start to see and open up to what's right, what is right, or what could be, what we could celebrate, what are the successes, then we're starting to remind ourselves that there's hope and that life is worth celebrating, that even though all these, maybe this bad thing happened or all these bad things happened, it doesn't have to define me. It's a part of who I am, and I'm resilient. And my body is an amazing thing. And I have the ability to heal. And over time, Trauma the tiger can relax and be calm, right? And then we ask, as a community, bringing it back to empathy and compassion, that we create communities and people that can have that understanding, that patience, that ability to be present, to be the calm within the chaos, and that we're all working on our own healing, right? Our own awareness about where we're at and how we can contribute to the overall healing of a whole society, a whole world.
Yeah.
I had a family or a parent at our Manila screening of Balik Bayan in November ask, how long does it take for my child or one of my students to forget?
To forget.
And I said, I think no one will ever forget. And that this is controversial. Like, I don't think we're meant to forget, because that is a meaningful experience. But what can change is the meaning we give that event, or the meaning that we have processed or perhaps reprocessed, or the meaning we give ourselves reacting to that event. And I said that could take a lifetime, or it may never happen. And that's the hard part, is to understand that everyone reacts differently and has different meanings to different experiences. And just because someone does not change the meaning to the event doesn't mean that the work they're doing is not valuable, or the therapy is not working, shall we say. So this is the hard part of real talk is, trauma is different for every person. And although we want the trauma to go away, like the impact on the body, it may never go away. It just might be a different impact.
Or hold a different role or space.
Have you heard of that allegory of like the box and the button?
Mm.
Okay.
Tell us.
Okay, so you have a box, a square, and that box has a little button in it, and there's a ball that's bouncing inside that box. That is the trauma. And when it happens, your box is very small. The ball bounces around, it hits that button, And so as you go through like healing and resilience over time, that box gets a little bit larger, and then that ball keeps bouncing. It doesn't hit the button as much as it used to, but it's still bouncing in there. And so, like that's me too with some things. I've gotten to a point where my box around certain things is very big.
Yeah.
And like maybe something happens and it got the button got hit that day, and I'm feisty and alert that day. But I have had so many different things too of physical, of acting now, all these different tools that I use now, that it's like that button might get pressed, but I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
You now have the coping strategies and awareness and insight on how you can help take some time to like pause and respond, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why
we grow around it.
Yeah, I love
we
that.
don't like disarm the button. We don't cut the cords to
it's
that.
always there.
It's always there.
Our resilience just gets bigger, or right? Our ability to deal. Yeah. Oh, I love that, Deanna. Thanks for sharing that.
One more strategy I want to share is around connection. Now there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable sharing and being around others, and that's totally awesome. And that's for that person. And there's some people who can really benefit from being around people that love them, and that connection and love and compassion all can contribute to the parasympathetic response. And so reaching out again around mental health, around trauma, you don't even have to talk about trauma. It just people who love you, and if you don't think you have people that love you, maybe try and find that self-love for yourself, but also try and reach out to people who could love you. And I know that's risky and that can be very scary. But if it's resonating with you, if this message is resonating with you, sometimes that connection can be just what we need without having to talk about anything.
Yeah.
So like when I was 15, I had a really, really adverse bullying experience, like very, very traumatizing. And my friend's mom, we didn't talk about it. She just, the next day, me and her daughter, we went to see a movie together and got pizza. and she paid for it. No questions asked. They didn't talk. They didn't sit me down to talk about what happened. We could later down the line, but for that moment, she just said, like we love you and we cherish you, so we're gonna go watch a movie together and take you off of your you can set that aside for now. I'm so it's been well over a decade now, and I still remember that.
Yeah,
Right.
that meaningful connection
Thanks for
and the
sharing.
impact that it had. And I think and then if you have the capacity and you're in a place and you notice someone who is feeling down or has maybe removed themselves, like a reminder to myself, like, let's reach out, like, let's, just approach them and say hi or share a smile or give a hello or buy a sandwich or share a meal. Like if you have the capacity, let's do that, because it puts a lot on someone who is in that place to reach out. They don't have the capacity a lot of times. So if you do, let's reach out. Like, let's be part of that community that's lifting and raising people up and providing hope.
Well, it's
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah, like with them, they're in that fight or flight moment, right? Like, so really the expectation of the capacity being on them is kind of insurmountable in a way, because they need to learn to move beyond that, but absent having some human connection to really give them that opportunity, you're not. So again, going back to the whole idea of like, you need to, we all benefit from helping these people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much. Like, obviously, like, we've been working at Key for so many years now, but I feel like I'm still learning new things from Jon and Paula every day. And that I've heard of this book for so many years, but I've seen it grow, and hearing those stories with the clients, I'm just blown away on that too. We're closing this off now. We're winding down for all of our watchers and listeners, that if you would like to pick up My Name is Trauma for yourself, you can visit keycreative.com, QIcreative.com, or mynameIstrauma.com. That's where you can find the book online in hardcover, softcover, downloadable PDF. I think we have a few other free treats and goodies there too you can download as well. I'm not sure how many other languages it's been
We have
translated
8
to.
different languages.
Okay.
We haven't published them in all those languages yet, but we have them ready to go.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else you wanted to, or did I cover that?
I think that's just the free video of My Name is Trauma. So it
that's
is totally
right.
accessible if the video, if just to get that conversation and going, then the video can do the trick.
Yeah. Like
Oh.
if you can't buy it, you could get it maybe at the library, but if not, the video's there. It's kind of like, gives people something that they can reach out to.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Stay tuned for a potential mini series, animated My Name is Trauma series. Stay tuned in the sometime future.
All right. So shall we whoosh it out?
All right.
Okay. All right. Fists in, everybody. 3, 2, 1.
Whoosh. Awesome.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Key Talks is a project of Key Creative. Our co-hosts are Paula Audrey Rivero and Deanna Halls. Our production team is Michael Schwake, Jessa Dupuis, and Deanna Halls. Music by Jon Jon Rivero. To reach out to us or access services for you or your family, visit keycreative.com. That's QIcreative.com, and fill out our online intake form. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.